In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the different methods of creating a flight plan in the DCS A-10C CDU. So there's a couple of different methods that we're using in the 476, and each method has its pros and cons. Personal preference, I prefer the second method, but certainly we have other members who traditionally all of us have used this first method that I'm going to show here, and I'll try to demonstrate the pros and cons. And then finally, I will do a third CDU entry using the second method, but with a more complex flight plan. And although it's more complex, I do think that the MDC itself is reflective of a typical mission that we might have here in combat in the 476. So I'm going to use that for demonstration purposes of creating more than one flight plan into the system. So starting with the first method first, and just if you want to jump through this video, I will create time entries, so look for that in the description so that you can jump specific to the portion of the video that is of interest to you, assuming you don't need to see the whole thing. So the first method is what we, again, historically have done here in the 476. It involves copying points out of the navigation database into the mission database so that we can relabel them. And these guys over here in this column, these are my labels, and so that we can change their altitudes. And what that ultimately does is that gives us the floating TD box in the air that we can reference. Also, using this method allows us to plug in desired time on target for every single point in the flight plan. So we're going to do that first. And as I do this, what you're going to see is that everyone's got a different personal preference. Some people like to do each point first. So for example, they copy over apex, they relabel it to whatever they want to label it, and then they change the altitude before moving on to the second waypoint. I personally prefer to copy all of my points, then relabel them, and then put all the altitudes in, and finally move them into the flight plan manager. So again, for personal preference, we're going to do my method, and hopefully if I don't make too many typos, this should be fairly quick. So let's get ourselves into mission mode and flip to UTM, and let's start plugging these guys in. So first here, apex, dry link, and I won't talk through all of them. Now, when we look at waypoint 11, you'll notice this one has coordinates. So this is the exception to what I've been doing. What I like to do is I'll go ahead and use the label. So I'll do fence.out, and then I'll hit basically right line select key 3, or basically the copy function here. And I'll create that, and then I'll go ahead and punch in those coordinates. So Papa Bravo 114520, and then I'll go back to Jackson and do what I was doing previously. Okay, now that we've done with that, I type in 1 so I can get back to that first mission point, and I'm just going to run through and relabel them. So let's not be concerned with whether these are good labels. These are just for example, so I'm going to use these labels. This is pretty typical. Of course, you can't use labels that are identical to the nav points, because that's just going to take you back to that nav point. So MS dry leak, and then MSN3. Fence out's already done. 12 and 13 don't have labels, so let's get to approach and px.faf. So obviously I'm not using the on-screen CDU. I've got these keys mapped to my keyboard, so I'm just typing away, and that is pretty standard here in the 476. Okay, so those are all done. So let's get back to number 1, and now let's quickly punch in the elevations, and you'll see I'll do this very, very quickly. So 3,000, 6,000. Okay, that's it, done. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and plug in desired time on target. Not going to do that. What I'll do next is I'm going to just put them into the flight plan manager. So I'll pull up the flight plan manager, select the automatically generated one, and start plugging them in. Pretty easy here. So one will go into one, two go into two, and we'll fill them in that way. Yep. Oops, so I made a mistake. Very easy to correct. So just put the one I actually want and get back to it. All right, and now I'm done. So what I'll do is I'll get myself into flight plan manager mode, and let's look at the results of this. So number one, what we'll do is we will, with our HUD soy, we'll look at our HUD, and essentially you can see in the lower right hand in the data block there, my labels are showing up, and as Apex was my first, we can see there, and let's just compare. So you can see that we've got that. We'll hide the kneeboard, and we'll just cycle through. So all of my labels that I've entered. And as I fly, pretty common again, this is what we do standard in the 476. So one of the drawbacks to this method, however, if we look at our TAD, our tactical awareness display, which of course is meant to help us maintain or improve SA, situational awareness. If I zoom out here, what you'll see is that, so we're in flight plan mode, so all of those points I've copied over, they've got the line drawn through them, but that's a little bit cluttered. So, you know, not the best situation. We'll talk about that with the third method we do. But again, they're all here. The real drawback to using this method is when I want to flip to mission mode so I can focus on my mission points, all of these points are still there. So let's do that very quickly on our UFC. Let's go into mission mode. And now we go back and look here. All those points are still there. So why does this matter? Well, if you're in a combat scenario and you've checked in with a FAC and he's giving you a bunch of points, then your HUD, your TAD could be cluttered, and that would probably reduce your situational awareness. Whereas if you only put the mission points in that were relevant to the mission mode, then you probably would have a less cluttered TAD. So that's just one of the points to make. Again, not that you couldn't operate in the other way, just wanted to point that out. So what you could do is the other method of entry, which will pretty much simplify this. If I look at the desired time on target, if that's something I want to do, I probably want to use this method if I really want to be very specific about my desired time over target for each of the points that I am flying. So now that we've done that, let's do the same MDC, but this time we're going to use the direct flight plan entry method. So I'm going to just grab another quick hot jet. And we'll let DCS do its little zoom out thing first. Excuse me. And then what we'll do is we'll get that next flight plan in. So get us back in the snap view mode. Okay, so here's the MDC again, but what we're going to do is I'm just going to skip to another copy of it. So it's the exact same set of points, although I've removed the labels for things that I don't deem mission points. So my navigation points, they don't have labels. I'm not going to relabel them. And only my mission points, the things relevant for my mission, will be relabeled. Not necessarily, you know, again, certainly cuts down on some of the time of the MDC generation, but not that big of a deal because some people, when they don't plan on relabeling, they don't put them anyway. So let's compare and contrast the method. So what I like to do, again, we're in mission mode UTM. First, I'm going to create anything in my MDC that's a mission point, which is really obvious to see. Starts down here with waypoint number 7. So essentially, let's do that. So CP3, quartzite, the target, and what do we got? Then after that, we've got S117, and of course our fence out, which again, same as before. We're gonna create the label first, copy that point, and then Papa Bravo. Okay, so after that point, I want to go back and I want to relabel these because, oops, I screwed up there. I typed in my elevation let's assume I did not screw up my elevation there for my fence out. Let's go ahead and make that 15,000. And in fact, I want that at ground level, so I'm just going to put 000 for now. We'll ignore that I made that error. Normally I wouldn't do that. Essentially, come back here and choose mission point number 1, and I'm just going to quickly relabel them. Just like we did in the first method. Okay, so that's done. I'm not going to change the altitudes. That is personal preference. You can do that to make the TDCs float, but I'm going to consult my MDC as I fly, so I don't need to change the altitude other than the one I screwed up here with the elevation. Using 0 should mean that might put that at MSL level, but again, just ignore that mistake that I made in this case. So now I've created my mission points. That's it. I've created them and I've relabeled them. Now what I do is I go direct to the flight plan manager and I start at the beginning and punch everything in. So here we go. And let's just do it. So first we're going to go apex. And then after apex, what do we got? Dry lake, dream, page down. And then Pegasus. And for all of my ones with labels, I just type in the labels. So here we go. And egress, and you see the autocomplete is working. And back to Jackson for 12. All right, and now we're done. So I'm not going to change any of the elevations. I will consult my MDC throughout the flight. Now a point about the MDC is some folks say, well, how do you consult it? Well, one, you're looking at one of the methods right now using Alaskan Grizzly's kneeboard builder. I literally before my mission just copy the MDCs over. I do that just for people who might be watching my live stream so they can see what I'm doing when I'm punching in all this points, like where am I getting that from? But when I actually fly, I'm not using this. Some people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I personally have an iPad that I have my MDCs on. Some other folks, they like to print them out so they can write on them. Nothing wrong with that. And other folks will use the Alaskan Grizzly's kneeboard. So whatever your method, as long as you can consult the kneeboard. And of course, there's the peak view. You can just pull it up and then let it go, pull it up, let it go. So you can quickly see where you're supposed to be. Honestly, to me, that improves your essay because you're constantly saying, yep, these next few points are 15,000. And I'm not necessarily just looking at those boxes to know where to fly. So for me personally, it's also improved my essay that way. So let's look at what happened in the HUD. So let's get into our flight plan mode. And so here, our labels are there. So as you can see, all the points are named what they were naturally named. And as you can see, this method overall was much, much faster. Now, some folks don't like the fact that those points are not numbered in order, and that's because they're in our navigation database, whatever order they were in the database. But that's not an issue because, again, when you're actually flying, if you're not sure which point to consult, obviously you've got your MDC, and of course your tactical awareness display. So let's look here. Okay, so we can see we've got all these points and we can consult them. So again, it looks exactly the same as the last method, except the elevations aren't there. But I don't need to look at a TD box to know what elevation to fly at. I'm simply going to fly that based on my systems, right? Based on the altitude in my HUD, so on and so forth. And consulting my MDC, again, it is really trivial to do this. So the other benefit, of course, is if we go into mission mode, now our TAD is much cleaner. Only those points relevant to the mission will show. So if we get dynamic points on the mission, right, a FAC-A gives us additional points, a SCAR coordinator gives us additional points, a wingman or lead gives us additional points, far less clutter on the HUD when we're in the, on the TAD when we're in the AO in a relatively dynamic situation where situational awareness is very, very important. So this is the second method that we can use. Again, a little bit faster, a little bit better SA. Finally, let's look at a more complex flight plan, but again, I think a typical flight plan, and see ultimately how we can really take advantage of the flight plan manager. So I will reslot again. Let DCS do its little zoom out. Okay. So this is a flight we flew literally just last night. And in this flight, essentially, I had all my targets ahead of time. And you can see my targets here on the right side of the MDC. I had 4 bunkers and a command and control building. And those were going to be my targets. So I had 10-digit grids, so very precise targets. And I was planning on dropping G38s in one pass on those targets, right? So the first 4 targets were going to get hit with G38s, and I was going to come back and maverick out at this command and control facility. So those ultimately are my mission points, in addition to my fence in, my IP, my egress, and my fence out point. Now that was optional. I didn't have to do these this way, but this is what I wanted to do. And so I also divided myself between 2 flight plans here. So essentially my ingress to the IP and then my egress flight plan. So what we're going to do now is essentially the same as the second method, but we're going to divide the flight plans. And ultimately, this is going to clean up the TAD between both of the previous examples I've shown you, and make sure that you have a much clearer tactical awareness display. And ultimately, the big goal here is better situational awareness. So again, let's do all of our mission points first. So let's get into mission mode, TM, and we're going to start here with the fence in. So that's GRN 47, and then Washington was our IP, and then you can also see that Washington is our egress, and then GRN 47, so nothing wrong with that we're using the same nav point multiple times. So we did that, so those 4 are in, and next what we want to do is we want to get our targets in there. So let's do the bunker. So those are coordinates, so like we did earlier, we're going to name them first, put them in there, and then let's get the coordinates in. So November Bravo 6. Okay, let's do number 2. And I'm trying not to make any typos here. So obviously in this mission where it was really important that we hit those targets precisely, I wanted to make sure that got everything in precisely, and then C2.east was my target. So let's get that in there. Okay, now all of my mission points are done. Now I just go straight to the flight plan manager. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 flight plans. We're going to do it manually. So let's just call the first one ingress. So I type that and I put it in here. I'm going to select that flight plan. I'm going to start putting in this first set of waypoints into that first flight plan. So here we go. Apex, Dry Lake. Oops, that's my typo there. Chose the wrong line, select key. And Juno. Page down, Dream, Miami, Raleigh, Dover, Maine North, and now we've got our fence in point. Oops. Oh, my fault. I did not relabel them. So, excuse me. I forgot I didn't relabel the other one. So very easy. Let's get back into our mode. So let's get back in. So the first one we did was the fence in. I would have done this as you saw at the last method first. So let's do fence in. And then let's go to the airport.ip for that second one. Then let's get that third one was egress. Pretty easy for me, even after I made a mistake, to go back and fix that. Okay. So now we've got that. So now let's just get back into the flight plan and pretty easy to resume where we were. So let's go there. So remain, so we're at our fence in point. So fence in. And then our final one in our first flight plan is going to be the IP. And there we go, we're done with that. So that flight plan's done. Now what I want to do is I want to create my egress flight plan. I'm not going to enter these targets into my flight plan. I don't want them showing up as part of my flight plan. I'll switch to mission mode when that is relevant for me. So what I'm going to do is create my egress flight plan. Let's choose that and let's start putting in. So first we've got our egress point and we've got our fence out. And now let's just go down that list. So St. Louis, Jackson, Miami, Apex, and then ultimately Nellis. Okay, we are now done. We're done. So this relatively complicated MDC, and besides my own mistakes there, it really doesn't take that much time. And so here's the benefit we get. So first, let's make sure we select our ingress flight plan, right? This is going to be the first one that we are using. So that is selected. I like to put the flight plan in manual mode. That means that I advance the points as I fly through them. Of course, feel free to leave it in auto mode so that as you fly over the points, the flight plan will basically progress you to the next point naturally on the TAD and in the HUD display. So here, let's see the results of this. So again, just like we saw the first time, let's get into flight plan mode. And what we're seeing here is, again, first flight plan is Apex, Dry Lake, through all of those points, again, up to the airport IP, and then you can see it just cycles back because that's my first flight plan, right? That is my ingress flight plan. And so if I look here on the TAD, you probably know where we're going with this. Let's get the map off and zoom out. Okay, that's a little cleaner than what we had before, where we saw both the ingress route and the egress route. And then of course, if I switch to mission mode, no surprises there, we're just going to have our mission points showing up on the TAD. Now, once I'm done and I'm coming back, of course, all I need to do is switch to my next flight plan, which I can do here, just using my repeater. And now, essentially, I'm using this flight plan either in manual or auto mode, whatever I want. And now the TAD is showing my egress waypoint. Now that path is almost identical, so kind of looks the same right there, but of course those points are different. So that's a relatively complex flight plan, but as you can see, besides my own little mistakes and errors and typos there, that it was very quick to have a relatively complicated MDC like this guy and have it be very organized. So how did I actually use this? Well, I used the ingress flight plan last night, and then I got to the combat area, and part of my fence in, like once I was at the IP, I essentially went into mission mode. So function mission. And then from there, so my fence in point, my airport, those are the first two. Then my egress, those are all mission points, that's fine. But I know my first target is bunker, right? Because in this particular mission, again, I had predetermined coordinates I was going to hit. So sometimes you'll just have one mission point or one target, so pretty easy there. So essentially I went through my G38s, pickle, DMS up, pickle, DMS up, pickle, DMS up. I guess I had a typo in there somewhere. And then yeah, flew back around, hit that last one with the C2. And then after I was done, I was back off to my flight plan. So again, I personally think this improves your situational awareness. It's certainly faster, even with a relatively complex flight plan. So I hope that this demonstrates how to use all these methods. And obviously, at this point, it is personal preference in the 476. Thanks for watching.